In the sleepy mountain town of Whitlow, mornings began before the sun rose, with the scent of rising dough and wood smoke hanging in the air like a promise. For Juniper Maddox, every day began the same way. She unlocked the door to Maddox and Daughters Bakery at 4:45 a.m. sharp, tied her hair back with the same faded ribbon she'd been using for years, and sank her hands into the flour-dusted rhythm of routine. It was the only life she'd ever known, quiet, dependable, unremarkable, just the way she thought she liked it. She was 25, still living above the bakery in the same apartment where she'd grown up with her mother and younger sister Delia. Their father had left when she was a child, taking with him any notion Juniper might have had about trust or forever. He was a good liar, her mother always said, and Juniper, ever the cautious learner, had vowed to never fall for good lies again. That promise had stretched itself into every part of her life. She had never left the town, never dated seriously, and had kept her virginity like a relic, not out of piety, but out of an unshakable sense that no man she'd met had ever truly seen. But that morning was different. It wasn't the golden light that spilled through the front window just after 6, or the regular hum of locals filtering in for their daily cinnamon rolls and black coffee. It was the envelope taped to the front door, bearing the smooth, cold logo of Rourke Consolidated Development. She'd seen it before, in the whispers around town about a major buyout. A corporation was quietly purchasing properties up and down Whitlow's main street, old shops and family businesses, including the building that housed her bakery. She hadn't believed it was true. Nobody in Whitlow had that kind of money, and nobody from outside ever cared enough to come. But the letter was real. The name on the signature line was real too. Cassian Rourke, CEO. The message was simple. The building had been purchased. The bakery's lease would expire in 30 days. There was no apology, no explanation, just the cold finality of a decision made in a boardroom far from the mountains. Juniper stood there, the morning sun barely reaching her shoes, her apron still tied, dough on her hands as her entire world shifted sideways. Delia arrived minutes later, bounding in with her usual chaotic energy and a paper cup from the gas station. When she saw the envelope in Juniper's hand, she sobered instantly. "Don't tell me that's what I think it is," Delia said. Juniper nodded, her jaw tight. "It's done. They bought the building." Delia cursed under her breath and threw her cup in the trash. "We have to fight this. We can't just roll over. This place, this is all we have." Juniper didn't answer right away. She walked behind the counter, put the letter on the shelf next to the cash register, and resumed kneading the dough she'd started. Her hands moved with practiced grace, but her mind was storming. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. But something inside her, something that had been dormant for years, stirred. It wasn't until the next afternoon that she met him. The man from the letter arrived without fanfare, stepping into the bakery like he didn't care if he was welcome. He was tall, sharp-suited despite the summer heat, and carried himself with the kind of detached precision that made Juniper think of architects or chess players. His hair was dark, slicked back, and not a single part of his expression betrayed surprise at the scent of vanilla and butter or the sight of flour smudged on the floor tiles. He looked around, cool and calculating, like a man mentally erasing the walls to replace them with steel and glass. "You're Cassian Rourke," Juniper said, stepping out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. He didn't offer a handshake. "And you're the tenant." "I'm the owner of the business. The tenant is a technicality." He nodded once, slow. "You've had a good run here." Juniper felt the words like a slap. "A good run? I've reviewed the financials. You're not making a profit large enough to justify the square footage. The building will be repurposed. It's nothing personal." She crossed her arms. "Maybe if you spent less time calculating margins and more time talking to people, you'd know this place is the heart of the town." Cassian's mouth quirked. Not a smile, but an acknowledgement. "Towns don't run on heart, Miss Maddox. They run on sustainability, efficiency. And men like you call that logic, but it's really cowardice. You don't build anything. You replace what's already alive with something empty." That made him pause. For a breath, the mask slipped, and Juniper saw something flicker in his eyes, something wounded and sharp. Then it was gone. "I didn't come to argue," he said. "I came to inform." "You could have sent another letter," she replied. "But I guess the man with all the power likes watching people react." Sometimes the reaction is the only honest part. He turned to leave but stopped at the door. There's a fundraiser tomorrow night at the Calder Estate. I'll be attending. So will the mayor. I assume you'll want to plead your case. Juniper's voice didn't shake. I don't plead. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. Then make a different kind of impression. And just like that, he was gone. Delia came out from the kitchen seconds later, eyes wide. What the hell was that? He looks like a villain in a courtroom drama. Juniper stared at the door, her breath shallow. That man doesn't feel things like normal people. But you shook him, Delia said. I saw it. Juniper didn't smile. She didn't feel victorious, but she felt something new, a fire that had lived under the surface for too long. She looked at the letter again, at her bakery, at the sun beginning to set beyond the mountain ridge. She wasn't going to beg, but she was going to fight. And maybe, just maybe, Cassian Rourke had no idea what he had just started. The next day unfolded under a slate-gray sky that seemed to reflect the weight pressing on Juniper's chest. The town moved on as if nothing had changed. People came in for their coffee and scones, made small talk about the weather, and left without noticing the quiet tension behind Juniper's eyes. She worked with the same steady hands, the same kind smile, but her mind wasn't in the room. It was back on Cassian Rourke, his voice low and even, his eyes sharp but hollow, his presence like a cold front sliding into a warm valley. She hated that he'd gotten under her skin, hated more that he had done it without effort. Delia had spent the morning pestering her. She wanted Juniper to go to the fundraiser, not just to argue the bakery's case, but to show that the Maddox sisters wouldn't go down quietly. Juniper didn't need convincing, but she wasn't ready to admit how badly she wanted to see him again. Not out of attraction, but out of some strange pull she couldn't explain. She had spent her whole life watching from the sidelines, playing it safe, building her world out of routine and silence. But Cassian had said something that stuck with her. The reaction is the only honest part. Maybe it was time to stop pretending calmness equaled strength. When evening fell, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror in a simple navy dress that hugged her waist and fell in soft waves to her knees. It wasn't flashy, but it made her feel grounded, real. She pinned her hair up loosely, letting a few strands fall. There were no heels, just clean flats, and the only makeup she wore was a swipe of red lipstick that her mother had once called her power color. As she looked at herself, she didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Not because she looked different, but because, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't hiding behind the apron or the counter. She was walking into a lion's den on her own terms. The Calder estate sat on a hill above Whitlow, overlooking the valley like it belonged to someone else's world. The mansion was old money, stone archways, marble steps, windows like watchful eyes. She could already hear the clinking of glasses and the polite hum of voices before she even reached the entrance. A valet offered to take her coat, and she hesitated, unused to such treatment. Inside, everything gleamed. Chandeliers sparkled above a sea of tailored suits and elegant dresses. Politicians, investors, local officials, they all mingled like actors in a play she had never auditioned for. She moved through the crowd quietly, observing. No one noticed her at first. She was just another quiet woman in a modest dress, unaccompanied, not networking, not boasting. Until she stepped into the main parlor and saw him. Cassian stood near the fireplace, drink in hand, speaking to the mayor in low tones. He wore black, sharp as ink, with a gray tie that matched the steel in his gaze. He noticed her instantly. His eyes flicked toward her, just once, and then returned to the conversation. But that one glance was enough to shift the air in the room. It told her he had expected her to come. It also told her he didn't intend to make this easy. She waited until he was alone before approaching. He was examining a painting on the wall, a stark landscape, all empty fields and cold sky. Fitting. I didn't come to plead, she said, stopping a few feet from him. He didn't look away from the painting. No, I didn't think you would. Then why invite me? Cassian finally turned to face her. Because you're the only one in this town who didn't ask me for something. And that made you interesting. I'm not here to entertain you. His mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. No, but you are here. I came from my bakery, she said. I came because it means something. Not just to me, but to the people who've built their lives around it. He studied her, gaze slow and deliberate. Everything ends, Miss Maddox. The fact that it meant something doesn't mean it can't be replaced. Juniper's spine straightened. Not everything can be replaced, and not everyone wants what you're offering. Cassian stepped closer, closing the space between them by just enough to change the feel of the room. What do you want then? The question threw her. Not because she didn't know, but because no one had asked her before. Not without conditions. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze without flinching. I want a chance to show you that what you're tearing down has value you can't measure in spreadsheets. He tilted his head. You want a chance. I want one night, she said. At the bakery. No lawyers, no deals. Just you and me. You experience it as it really is. And if, after that, you still want to level it, I won't stop you. Cassian stared at her, unreadable. Then he slowly nodded. One night. Juniper exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Tomorrow, he added. I'll be there at 8. She nodded. Then without another word, she turned and walked away, weaving back through the crowd, her heart pounding. As she reached the door, she glanced back once. Cassian hadn't moved, but he was watching her. Not like a man sizing up a threat, but like someone seeing something he hadn't expected. Something he didn't yet know how to name. The next day moved with an unsettling quiet, the kind of stillness that carried anticipation rather than peace. Juniper went about her usual routine at the bakery, but every movement felt slightly offbeat, as though the rhythm she had relied on for years had shifted half a second out of sync. The regulars came and went, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering just beneath her surface. She kneaded dough, took orders, smiled when she had to, but her thoughts were far from muffins and coffee. They were circling one man, one night, and a single opportunity she had somehow negotiated from someone who didn't offer second chances. Cassian Rourke was coming to her bakery at 8 o'clock. No assistants, no lawyers, no architects. Just him. And her. She didn't know what exactly she was trying to prove, only that it mattered. It mattered to make him see, to feel something beyond profit and utility, to understand that this little shop wasn't just brick and flour. It was memory. It was safety. It was identity. Delia noticed the shift in her sister immediately and wasn't subtle about it. Are you nervous? She asked around noon as they restocked the front display. I'm focused, Juniper replied, pressing the last of the tarts into position. Focused on impressing a billionaire who's trying to tear down everything we've ever built? Delia leaned on the counter. Or focused on looking perfect for him when he arrives? Juniper gave her a flat look. This isn't about him. It's about saving what's ours. Delia shrugged, unconvinced. Sure, but if you do happen to knock him off that robotic high horse of his in the process, I'll bake you a whole chocolate cake in celebration. By 6, the bakery had been cleaned twice over. The lights were soft and warm, casting a golden hue over the wood-paneled walls and the delicate pastries displayed under glass. Juniper had closed early, telling the townspeople it was for inventory. She didn't want an audience. This wasn't a spectacle. It was a test, of herself more than anything. She changed into a dark green dress, modest but flattering, something her mother had sewn for her years ago for a holiday service at church. Her hair she wore down, soft waves falling over her shoulders. There was no makeup, no jewelry beyond a thin bracelet her sister had gifted her. She didn't want to look like someone else. She wanted to be seen exactly as she was. At precisely 8 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Cassian walked in without hesitation, without pausing at the threshold. He wore dark slacks and a buttoned shirt rolled at the sleeves. No tie, no jacket. Casual in a way that somehow felt more deliberate than formal wear. He surveyed the space slowly, his expression unreadable, then turned his attention to her. Juniper stood behind the counter, wiping her hands with a linen towel. You're punctual. I always am, he said, stepping closer. Habit of the job. She gestured to the front table, already set for 2 with plates, cloth napkins, and a small vase of daisies from her garden. Then let's not waste time. He sat down across from her, hands folded, posture relaxed but alert. She brought out 2 cups of coffee, then returned with a plate of warm apple galettes, the crust glistening with sugar, the center soft and fragrant with cinnamon. This is the most popular item on the menu, she said as she sat. It's my mother's recipe. She used to bake them when we couldn't afford birthday cakes. Cassian took a bite without comment. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully. When he swallowed, his expression remained neutral, but something about his posture softened just slightly. "You didn't ask me here for food," he said after a moment. "No," Juniper replied. "I asked you here for understanding." He looked at her. "Understanding what?" "That you're not just tearing down a building. You're erasing something that matters. To me, to this town." Cassian leaned back. "Buildings fall all the time. Progress doesn't stop because people are sentimental. It should slow down long enough to listen," she said, voice firm. "Not everything valuable can be measured in returns. Some things exist simply because they make life bearable." He studied her. "You think I don't understand that? I think you've spent so long managing risk and money that you forgot people don't fit neatly into either." A tense silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, he set down his fork and said, "Tell me what this place is to you. Really." Juniper's breath caught. No one had ever asked her that. Not like that. She exhaled slowly. "It's where I grew up, where my mother taught me how to mix dough and how to stand back up when the world tried to knock us down. It's where I learned that quiet strength is still strength. It's where I go when I don't know what to do next. And it's the only place in this town that has always felt like it belonged to me." Cassian was quiet for a long time. Then, almost absently, he said, "My father built Rourke Consolidated from nothing. He believed in numbers, that if the numbers made sense, the world would follow. I inherited that belief because he left me no choice." Juniper tilted her head. "Do you still believe it?" His answer was a long time coming. "I don't know." They sat there, neither eating, both caught in the strange stillness between opposition and connection. Then Juniper stood. "There's something else I want to show you," she said, walking to the back of the bakery. He followed her without question. She opened a narrow door and led him into a small room lit by a single hanging bulb. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with ingredients, but with journals, photos, drawings made by local children, thank you notes from soldiers overseas who'd once been stationed nearby and missed the taste of home. It wasn't storage. It was a living archive. "These are the stories this building holds," she said quietly. "You can tear it down, but you'll never replicate this." Cassian looked around the room, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "I didn't expect this." "No one ever does," she said. They returned to the front room in silence. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair, but didn't put it on. "I'll need time," he said. "For what?" "To think." Juniper nodded. "Just don't take too long. We don't have much left." Cassian looked at her for a long time, his gaze lingering as if he wanted to say something more, but didn't know how. Then with a curt nod, he turned and walked out, the bell above the door chiming behind him. Juniper stood in the silence he left behind, her heart steady, her hands trembling. She had shown him everything. Now the rest was up to him. Juniper woke to the soft tapping of rain against her bedroom window and the chill of uncertainty that had settled into her bones overnight. She didn't sleep much. Her mind had spent the dark hours replaying every detail of the evening with Cassian Rourke. The way he looked at the galette as if it carried some secret ingredient he couldn't name. The way his voice lost its edge when he finally admitted he wasn't sure what he believed anymore. He hadn't given her any clear promises, but she hadn't expected one. What he'd given her instead was a moment of vulnerability, a glimpse beneath the steel surface that no one else in town had likely ever seen. And for some reason, it made her restless in ways she wasn't prepared to face. She pushed herself out of bed and went downstairs to the bakery, where the air was already warm from the ovens. Delia was there, humming off-key as she prepped the morning trays. She glanced up as Juniper walked in and raised an eyebrow at the look on her sister's face. Tired, distracted, but not defeated. "So?" Delia asked as she slid a pan of croissants into the oven. "How was your little, whatever that was, date? Peace talk? Battle of ideologies?" Juniper sighed, tying her apron around her waist. "None of those. All of those. I don't know." Delia grinned. "Did he melt under your small-town charm?" Juniper grabbed a mixing bowl and began cracking eggs. "He listened, I think." Delia didn't push further, which Juniper appreciated. The truth was, she didn't have answers yet. Not for her sister, not for herself. All she could do was wait. She hated waiting, but the alternative was giving up, and she wasn't going to do that. The day passed in a blur of orders, deliveries, and conversations that barely registered. The usual comfort she found in routine felt dulled, like a familiar song played just a beat too slow. She kept glancing at her phone, half expecting a message that never came. She wasn't sure what she'd even wanted to say. "I've changed my mind. I won't demolish the building. Let's be friends." Or more. She shook the thought out of her head. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about feelings or attraction. It was about respect. About proving that she and everything she'd built mattered. It wasn't until just after closing that something did happen. A knock on the front door. Juniper turned and saw someone she didn't recognize standing on the other side of the glass. Young, early 20s, in a well-tailored gray suit with a badge clipped to his pocket that bore the Rourke name. She opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" He smiled politely. "Ms. Maddox, my name's Rowan Rourke, Cassian's brother." She blinked. "You're his brother?" Rowan nodded, stepping inside as she held the door open. "Half-brother, technically. We share a father. Cassian sent me to deliver a message." "Why didn't he come himself?" she asked, trying not to sound too disappointed. Rowan's smile faltered. "He's dealing with something. Legal complications in Atlanta, but he didn't want to leave you without an update." She gestured to a booth. "Go on." Rowan sat across from her and pulled a folder from his bag, placing it gently on the table between them. "Cassian has decided to suspend demolition plans on the bakery. For now. For now. He's not reversing the acquisition, but he's pausing development until further notice. He wants to reevaluate the long-term value of community-based assets." Juniper narrowed her eyes. "Is that what he said? Word for word?" Rowan shrugged. "You have to understand, my brother doesn't express himself the way most people do. But I think, between you and me, he's trying to figure out what the hell he's feeling." Juniper sat back in the booth, unsure whether to feel relief or something else entirely. "Why are you telling me this? What does he want from me?" Rowan tilted his head. "That's just it. I don't think he wants anything, and I think that's exactly why he keeps thinking about you." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Rowan stood, adjusted his jacket, and added, "There's a benefit gala this Friday. One of Cassian's. I don't think he was going to invite you, but I am." Juniper raised a brow. "Why?" "Because I think you have more influence on him than he realizes. And maybe if you show up, he'll finally say what he's too damn afraid to admit." He handed her a cream-colored envelope and turned to leave. Just before he reached the door, he looked back. "Oh, and bring something sweet. He never says it, but he liked the apple galette." That night, Juniper sat on her couch in the apartment above the bakery, staring at the invitation. The envelope was unmarked, elegant, and heavier than it should have been. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it and read the details. Time, place, dress code. It was formal. Black tie. A world away from Whitlow's dusty streets and hand-sewn dresses. She had every reason to say no. This wasn't her world. She didn't belong among billionaires and board members. But something in her, some bold, flickering thing that had awakened the moment Cassian Rourke walked into her shop, refused to be silenced. She got up, walked to her closet, and pulled out a dress she hadn't worn in years. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in a quiet way. Midnight blue with delicate embroidery at the hem, fitted at the waist, flowing at the bottom. She held it up and saw herself not as the girl who'd been dismissed, underestimated, or overlooked, but as the woman who had stood her ground. She would go, and when she saw Cassian again, she would not wait for him to speak first. She would ask him what he was really afraid of, and she would not let him hide behind silence any longer. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in the scent of fresh rain and the low, distant roll of thunder that never quite reached the city. Juniper stood in front of the full-length mirror in the small bedroom above the bakery, staring at her reflection as if seeing someone else entirely. The navy blue dress she'd chosen hugged her figure with modest elegance, its hem swaying just above her ankles. Her dark hair was swept into a low, simple twist, a few strands framing her face. She wore no jewelry, no dramatic makeup, just a touch of blush and the same red lipstick she had worn the night Cassian came to the bakery. It made her feel steady somehow, grounded, and she would need that tonight. She'd never attended anything remotely like a black tie event. Her life had always revolved around flower-dusted aprons, local farmers markets, and community bake sales. The idea of walking into a ballroom full of millionaires and political elites felt absurd, like stepping onto the set of someone else's life. But she wasn't going for the spectacle. She wasn't going to impress anyone. She was going to look Cassian Rourke in the eye and find out what, if anything, was real. Delia helped zip the dress, then stepped back, arms crossed. "Okay, so you're terrifyingly beautiful, and I kind of hate you?" Juniper smiled, trying not to let the nerves show. "I'm not trying to be beautiful. I'm trying to be taken seriously." Delia rolled her eyes. "Trust me, in that dress, they'll take you seriously, or they'll trip over themselves trying." The car Rowan had sent pulled up precisely at 7:30. It was sleek and black and silent as it rolled to a stop outside the bakery. The driver, a man in his 50s with a kind smile and a professional air, opened the door for her and gave a short nod. "Ms. Maddox, we're right on schedule." The ride was smooth, quiet, and gave Juniper too much time to think. She kept her eyes on the city lights flickering past the windows, trying to imagine the world she was about to walk into. Cassian's world. It felt far removed from the worn tiles of her bakery, the creak of wooden shelves, the warmth of cinnamon and sugar. But she reminded herself that she had just as much right to walk into that room as anyone else. Maybe more. The venue was a historic hotel in the heart of the city, its towering columns wrapped in twinkling lights, the entrance lined with velvet ropes and photographers. As she stepped from the car, flashes went off, though she wasn't the one they were aiming for. Still, she drew eyes. She could feel it. And as much as she wanted to shrink into the background, she held her head high and walked through the entrance with the quiet poise of someone who knew she didn't belong and chose to be there anyway. Inside, the ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings, casting golden light over polished floors and elegantly dressed guests. A quartet played near the far wall, the soft strains of a violin dancing through the air. Waiters in black tuxedos moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. And at the center of it all, surrounded by a small circle of influential-looking men and women, was Cassian Rourke. He hadn't seen her yet. He stood with his back partly turned, dressed in a midnight black tuxedo, crisp and tailored to perfection. His posture was relaxed, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of something amber-colored. He looked like he belonged in that room. He looked like he owned it. And for the first time, Juniper understood just how far from Whitlow he really was. Then he turned. Their eyes met. The conversation around him fell away. For a moment, he didn't move. His expression didn't shift. But something in his eyes changed, flickered, like the first break in a wall of ice. Juniper crossed the room slowly, ignoring the glances, the whispered questions. When she reached him, she paused just short of touching distance. "I thought you weren't going to invite me," she said. He set down his drink. "I wasn't." "Then why am I here?" "Because Rowan doesn't listen," he said. "And because I didn't want you to come and didn't want you to stay away. I haven't decided which would have been worse." She smiled faintly. "That's honest, at least." Cassian's gaze moved over her face, her dress lingering not with hunger, but with something heavier. Recognition, maybe. Admiration that didn't need to be spoken. "You look," he started, then stopped. "You look like yourself," which is exactly the problem. She raised a brow. "Problem? You're not supposed to fit here," he said. "You walk in and everything I thought I understood about this world shifts just enough to be uncomfortable. Maybe that's a good thing." He exhaled, something like a laugh escaping through his nose. "You always do that." "What?" "Disarm people without even trying." "I'm not here to disarm you, Cassian," she said. "I'm here because I want to know what this is." He looked at her carefully. "This? You. Me. The bakery. The way you looked at me when you walked out that night, like you wanted to say something but didn't know how." Cassian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What do you want it to be?" "I want the truth. I want to know if this is just a game to you. If I'm a puzzle you're trying to solve, or if maybe, for 1 second, you let yourself feel something." He was silent for a long moment. The music behind them swelled and faded again. Finally, he said, "I've spent most of my life making sure I never owed anyone anything. Not trust, not affection, not even honesty. It was easier that way. Safer. And now?" He looked down at his hands, then back at her. And now I'm standing in a room full of people who think they know me, wishing I were somewhere else. With you, not here. Juniper's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to say that. She prepared herself for deflection, for cold distance. Not this. Then leave, she whispered. Come back with me, not forever, not for anything complicated, just tonight. Come see who you are when you're not surrounded by glass and power. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He offered her his hand, and she took it. They didn't speak much during the ride back. The silence between them was not awkward or strained, but thick with anticipation, the kind that hummed like static beneath the skin. Cassian sat beside her in the back seat of the town car, his profile cast in shadows from the streetlights passing in slow rhythm outside the window. He didn't look at her, but his hand was resting between them on the leather seat, fingers slightly curled as if inviting hers to slip into the space they created. She didn't reach for him, and he didn't press. But the nearness, the awareness of him beside her, sent waves of heat through Juniper's chest and down her spine. She couldn't remember the last time silence had felt this loud. When they arrived at the bakery, it was just past midnight. The shop was closed and dark, the windows quiet, and the street deserted except for the hum of a street lamp and the occasional chirp of insects in the bushes. She led him around to the back, to the staircase that climbed to the apartment above, her keys jingling softly in her hand. She paused once at the top, looking over her shoulder. He had followed her wordlessly, his gaze calm but focused. She didn't ask him if he was sure. He didn't need to be asked. Inside, the apartment was modest and warm. The lights were dimmed, a soft glow from the overhead lamp in the kitchen, casting a golden haze over the room. Cassian stepped inside slowly, his eyes scanning the space with an almost reverent curiosity, as if he were stepping into a memory he'd never lived. Juniper slipped off her shoes and hung her coat, suddenly acutely aware of how lived in her space was. The shelf of dog-eared books, the old kettle on the stove, the faint scent of vanilla and cinnamon baked into the very walls. I don't think I've ever been anywhere this quiet, he said after a moment, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. It's not silence, she replied. It's peace. There's a difference. He nodded, turning slowly to face her. I don't think I've had much of either. She walked to the kitchen, busying her hands with the kettle, pouring water, moving with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Tea? Cassian gave the faintest smile. Sure, if you're making it. They stood together in the small kitchen, the steam curling up between them, the warmth of it strangely intimate. When she handed him the mug, their fingers brushed. It was the smallest of touches, but it sparked something between them, something neither of them could ignore anymore. Juniper leaned back against the counter, sipping from her own cup, watching him over the rim. Why did you really come tonight? He didn't answer right away. He set his mug down on the counter beside him and crossed his arms, eyes fixed on the floor. Because I didn't want to be the man who walks away from things that matter. You've done it before? She asked gently. More times than I can count. He looked at her then, and in his expression, she saw something raw. Not broken, but weary. Like a man who had carried a heavy armor for so long, he'd forgotten how to breathe without it. I told myself I didn't need people, he continued, that needing someone was a weakness, that attachment was liability. I've been building walls since I was 15, Juniper. And you, somehow, you walked into my life and didn't try to climb over them. You just stood there quietly until I realized I was tired of the view on my side. Juniper set down her mug. Her heart was pounding so hard it was a wonder he couldn't hear it. I didn't come into your life to break you open, Cassian. I just didn't want to disappear quietly. You didn't, he said. You couldn't. A silence stretched between them, thick and electric. Then slowly, deliberately, he stepped closer. He didn't touch her, not at first. He simply stood in front of her, his breath shallow, his eyes locked on hers. I don't know how to do this, he said. Whatever this is. Neither do I, she admitted. But I think maybe we don't have to get it right tonight. Maybe we just have to stop pretending we don't feel it. He reached for her then, his hand brushing the side of her face with a tenderness she hadn't expected. His fingers slipped into her hair, anchoring there. And when he kissed her, it was not with the urgency of someone desperate, but with the steady certainty of someone who had finally stopped running. It wasn't soft. It wasn't rushed. It was real. Her hand slid up his chest, finding the edge of his jacket and tugging him closer. His other hand curved around her waist, pulling her gently into him. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Every motion, every breath, every whispered sound between them said enough. He lifted her carefully as if she were something sacred, and she guided him to the bedroom. The room was small, unremarkable, but in that moment, it was transformed into something rare and honest. They undressed without ceremony, without shame. She had never been naked in front of anyone. Not fully, not in a way that wasn't buried in fear. But with Cassian, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel used. She felt seen. They lay together in the dim light, the weight of their bodies pressing together like the final closing of a long, aching distance. There were no lies between them, no expectations, just two people who had spent their lives building walls, finally finding the courage to stand in the open. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, his arm curled around her, her head resting on his chest. His heartbeat was slow and steady beneath her ear. She traced small circles on his skin with her fingers, not speaking, not needing to. "I've never done that before," she whispered eventually. He turned his head slightly, his voice low. "Been with someone?" "No, but also trusted someone that much." He kissed the top of her head. "You trusted the right person?" Juniper closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his body and the softness of the moment carry her into sleep. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't bracing for impact. She wasn't waiting for the goodbye. She was just here, with him, and she hoped, deep in her chest, that when morning came, he would still be there. Not just in her bed, but in her life. Morning came slowly, filtering through Juniper's bedroom window in soft ribbons of light that danced along the walls and the edge of the sheets. She awoke with her cheek pressed against warm skin, her arm draped across a bare chest that rose and fell in a steady rhythm. For a long moment, she didn't move. She didn't want to. The air was still, peaceful, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no dread waiting for her at the edge of waking. Just quiet and warmth, and the subtle weight of Cassian's arm holding her close, as though he hadn't let go all night. When she finally lifted her head, she found him already watching her. His expression wasn't unreadable like it so often was in public or during negotiations. It was raw and unguarded. There was no barrier between them now. No contract, no business arrangement. Only truth in all its terrifying vulnerability. "Hi," she said softly, unsure of what else to say. "Hi," he echoed, his voice lower, sleep roughening its edges. They lay there in silence for a few moments longer, neither of them willing to break the fragile stillness. But eventually reality began to press in. Juniper shifted slightly, drawing the blanket up to her chest as she sat up. Cassian propped himself on one elbow, watching her with a quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken all over again. "Do you regret it?" she asked, not looking at him. "No," he said without hesitation. "Do you?" She turned to face him fully. "No, but I'm trying to figure out what happens now." Cassian exhaled and ran a hand through his tousled hair. "That makes two of us." He stood then, collecting his shirt from the floor and pulling it on slowly. Juniper watched the way his shoulders tensed as he buttoned it, the way his brow furrowed like he was preparing himself for a fight. But there was no fight here. Not with her. She slid out of bed and began to dress quietly. The silence between them this time full of questions they didn't know how to ask. Once they were both dressed, they ended up in the kitchen, sitting across from each other with steaming mugs of coffee and a plate of leftover scones between them. The space felt different now. It wasn't awkward, just uncertain. Juniper sipped her drink and studied Cassian, who seemed lost in thought. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw not the CEO, not the man who had nearly demolished her world, but someone who looked a little afraid. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that I'm not good at this. I don't know how to be with someone and not treat it like a transaction. Everything I've ever built, I've built alone. I know how to manage risk. I don't know how to manage you." Juniper didn't smile. She didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to manage me, and I'm asking you to choose me. Not for a deal, not for leverage, just for the person I am." "I don't know if I can be who you deserve," he said, voice rough. "Then be honest," she said. Be honest with me and with yourself. That's where it starts. He stared into his mug for a long time before finally nodding. Then here's the truth. I came to Whitlow to bury the past, to shut it down. I've spent years believing that if I kept building, kept winning, I wouldn't have to feel the weight of everything I lost. What did you lose? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. My mother. I was 17. She was the only one who ever told me I didn't have to earn love. After she died, my father taught me that love was weakness. He told me it made men soft, and soft men lose. I never forgot that. Juniper reached across the table, took his hand in hers. You don't have to unlearn it all in one night. He looked up at her then, and in his eyes she saw something shift, something deeper than affection or attraction, something that might have been the beginning of belief. The rest of the day passed in a strange kind of quiet contentment. Cassian stayed. He helped her clean the bakery after hours, wiping down counters and organizing shelves like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't check his phone. He didn't take calls. He was present in a way she had never seen from him before. As the sun began to dip below the hills, casting long shadows across the main street, Juniper leaned against the front window and watched him in the fading light. He looked out of place and yet entirely right at the same time. Like maybe this version of him, the one who could laugh at a smudge of flour on his shirt and ask about a recipe, had always been waiting for a place to exist. They closed the shop together, locking the front door as the sky turned indigo. Then they walked down the quiet street, hand in hand, not speaking, not needing to. The town was settling for the night, lights flickering on in windows, the hum of distant music floating through the air. For the first time, Cassian wasn't rushing toward the future or hiding from the past. He was just here, walking beside her, step for step. When they reached her front door, he paused. I have to go back tomorrow, he said, to the city. Just for a few days, there are things I need to straighten out. She nodded. Okay, but I want to come back. Okay, she said again, softer. He touched her face gently, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. And when I do, I want to talk about what this could look like. For real. Not borrowed time, not convenience. I want to build something that lasts. She smiled, leaning into his hand. Then come back ready. He kissed her slow and deep and certain, before stepping away and disappearing into the night. And as she stood there, alone on the porch with the echo of his kiss still on her lips, Juniper felt no fear. For the first time in years, the unknown didn't feel like a threat. It felt like possibility. The following week unfolded like the early hours of spring, slowly, quietly, with a kind of cautious hope. Juniper returned to her routine in the bakery, her hands finding solace in the kneading of dough, the folding of pastry, the comforting rhythm of familiar movements. But everything felt a little different. Not in an obvious way, not in a way others would notice, but inside something had shifted. Her chest didn't feel quite so tight in the mornings. Her thoughts didn't spin so chaotically. Cassian's absence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space, an intentional pause before something more permanent. And that made all the difference. He sent her a single message each day. Not long notes, not grand declarations, just fragments of his world. A photo of the sunrise from his penthouse window, a line of poetry he remembered from school, a snapshot of a newspaper headline with his dry commentary typed beneath it. She responded in kind. Photos from the bakery, glimpses of Whitlow's changing season, a paragraph from a book she'd pulled off her dusty shelf and finally started reading. The silence between them was filled with mutual understanding, with a deepening intimacy that didn't need to shout to be heard. One afternoon, as Juniper was locking up early to visit her mother's grave just outside of town, a package arrived at the bakery. It was small, wrapped simply in brown paper, tied with twine. Inside was a handwritten note on creamy paper, for the things that deserve to be preserved. Beneath the note was a deed, the deed to the building that housed Maddox and Daughters. It had been quietly transferred back into her name, effective immediately. No conditions, no contracts, no repayment required. Juniper stared at the document for a long time, her breath shallow. It wasn't just a gift, it was a message. Cassian had chosen to let go of control. He had released something valuable, not for leverage, not as a tactic, but because he believed in her, in them. in what they could build if trust came first. She called him that evening. He picked up on the first ring. "You did this," she said. "I did," he replied. "Why?" "Because I needed you to know I'm not coming back to claim anything. I'm coming back to offer something, a life, a future, with you in it." "And what if I say I'm not ready for all of that yet?" she asked, voice low. "Then I'll wait," he said. "But I won't walk away again." Juniper didn't cry. She smiled, her chest full and tight in the best way. "Then come back tomorrow. We'll figure the rest out together." When Cassian returned the next afternoon, he didn't come with a driver or a suit. He came in jeans and a soft gray shirt, carrying a bag of fresh coffee beans from her favorite roaster. He kissed her on the front steps of the bakery, right in front of the whole town, and she didn't care who saw. Because this wasn't scandal anymore. This wasn't a mystery or a whispered conversation. It was real, and it was hers. The days that followed were slow and intentional. He didn't move in. They didn't make plans for weddings or rings. Instead, they worked side by side to renovate the back room of the bakery into a new community space. One where local artists could display their work, where kids could come after school and learn how to bake, where the stories of the town could live and breathe. He invested not because he had to, but because he believed in what she believed in. He showed up every morning with coffee and a quiet smile. And slowly, he made space for himself in the corners of her life she had never shared with anyone. One Sunday morning, as they stood behind the counter together and watched a little girl press her nose to the glass to stare at the lemon bars, Cassian leaned in and said, "I used to think legacy was built in steel and towers." Juniper smiled, her fingers brushing his. "And now? Now I know it's in the way a place smells like home, in the way you remember someone's name, in the way you can build something that doesn't make you rich, but makes you whole." She looked at him, eyes soft. "So what do you want to build now?" He didn't hesitate. "A life. With you. One where we wake up every day knowing we chose this. Not because it was easy, but because it was ours." She kissed him then, in the quiet of the early morning, with flour in her hair and sunlight streaking across the wooden floor. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was true, and that, she'd learned, was more than enough.